What's up, y'all? My name is Srixis. I am a lead QA analyst at Hi-Rez Studios, known for Paladins mostly, but also Hand of the Gods. I've worked on Smite. I've worked on Rogue Company. I've kind of been around the block at Hi-Rez. But I'm not why you're here. Probably. No. The reason why you're here is because we announced something very exciting on clock 123, January 23rd. If you're watching this at a later date, we announced officially, we sneaked it, it snuck in a little bit in the patch notes on Friday, the Friday before this, but we fully announced the return of the payload mode to Paladins. Several of you who are watching this may not be fully aware of what payload is. You may be a newer player to Paladins. Several of you who are older players are extremely excited for the announcement of this. A couple of you even snuck in and played a couple games on PTS when it was accidentally released for a slight bit this morning. And that's fine. I'm glad that people got excited about that. But we're going to talk about, we have a little bit of an itinerary here today. We're going to talk about payload as a mode. For those of you who are aware of it, you can maybe skip a couple of minutes. I'll throw some little bookmarkies down in the timestamps or whatever. I don't know YouTube dialogue. Somebody help me. We're going to talk about why now, why not before. I guess before that we can go into like why it was removed in the first place. So what it is, why it was removed, why not before, why now. What about the other modes is going to be a big one. Um, just other thoughts about like general deprecation and like I have like a little bit of a Twitter thread that I can also link down in the description below about like deprecation of content, undeprecation of content, that kind of stuff. Just what it looks like for a game to unrelease and then try to re-release content, because there are a lot of ramifications to that, right? Like we can't just be like, hey, nothing bad's going to happen when we do this and go about our Tuesdays. It's Monday as I'm recording this, but it's almost Tuesday, so one of those is going to be correct. um, but yeah, so for those of you who are not familiar with Payload, Payload was a game mode in Paladins. I believe it came out in early 2016. I'm looking at the wiki. It says CB12, so closed beta 12, which was I want to say early 2016, but I'm not positive. Explicitly January 22nd, 2016. Yeah. It was a game mode where so think about like base Siege and Paladins now. Base Siege and Paladins now has two core gameplay facets, which is the stationary control the point aspect and the push the cart aspect. Um, if Onslaught is the game mode that is only stationary control the point aspect, Payload was the game mode that is solely the push the aspect. And so Payload was released really early on in Paladin's lifestyle. It was intended to be a shorter version of what was at the time the very long, kind of arduous. Um, we call it kind of Siege Alpha, I guess. The like closed beta Siege mode that required you to push a card to destroy doors and all that jazz. That was way long in Paladin's future. That's another video in and of itself. But essentially, Payload was around for just under 2 years. It has three maps. It has a map that was around base, Frog Isle, and Timbermill. No, yes, Timbermill. A map that was around the art style, I should say. Map that was around the original Ice Mines and um, Frozen Guard, and a map art style, and a map that was around the Serpent Beach and original Jaguar Falls art style. Those maps are called Outpost, Frostbolt Cavern, and Hidden Temple. You'll be seeing those when we go live with the patch. All three of those maps are returning. Um, but yeah, so the core game mode is one team's attacking, one team's defending. Attacking team pushes the cart. If you're in the radius and the defending team's not, the cart goes forward. If the defending team's in the radius, the cart stops moving. I don't actually remember if it goes backwards at the time, and I'm not going to look it up in the middle of the recording. Essentially, there's a path that you push it along. It can get up to 100% push. You have a set amount of time frame. If you the team once you get to the interim, like one team has a set amount of time frame, if they push all the way or the time ends, then the teams swap, and the team that was defending is now attacking, and vice versa. And whoever pushes it further, faster wins. Pushes the cart further, faster wins. And that's Payload. It's at its core the base cart pushing aspect of the Siege game mode that Paladins is well known for. That is the most popular mode in the game, and it's not super close. Um, so Paladins, around the time of late 2017, Paladins was going through some identity stuff. One of the things that was decided at that time was there are too many different game modes. The main core of the game mode, what we had figured out at the time, and by we I mean the Paladins team in general. I was a couple months out from joining the Paladins team myself at that point. But what the team had decided in general was Siege is the core game mode. Everybody likes Siege. That's the mode we really want to push for. And the other modes just don't provide the same amount, like they don't have the same play rate. They the love for the mode by comparison isn't quite I, I wouldn't say the love for it isn't as strong, but more so that it just wasn't as universally well liked. And so every mode outside of Siege kind of got looked at with scrutiny. Around that time, Team Deathmatch and Onslaught actually got merged into their own queue together. So it was a queue that was both of those modes at the same time. And another unfortunate aspect of that is we were cutting modes. We really wanted to reduce the number of individual queues so that it would. I mean, I'm going to be real with y'all. The fewer queues that are in a game, the better the matchmaking. That's kind of the reality of the situation. Is the more concentrated your player base is, the better the matchmaking is going to be. So we conglomerated TDM and Onslaught. We removed Payload, and then we had Siege. And then that was around the OB60s. Something else happened around the OB60s. Maybe that's another video. I don't think we need to get into that anymore. um, but so yes, so that was late 2017. So just over 5 years ago at this point, I believe that Payload was removed. And pretty soon after Payload was removed, we started getting requests of people commenting like, "Hey, this was my favorite game mode. Hey, why'd you remove it?" And I mean, it's not easy to tell people that the game mode is not super highly played, because the people who love the game mode are going to love the game mode, and I don't know, like that's the truth. And if their game mode's their favorite, that's their truth. So like, you're not telling somebody, you're trying to tell somebody they're wrong when they're living their own truth, I guess. I don't know. It wasn't super easy to like have those conversations. We tried our best. Um, but it at the end of the day, it just wasn't a very highly played game mode. It wasn't super popular, and we really wanted to reduce the number of queues to um, help out, especially the siege queues, and to an extent the alternate queues, like the what we called non siege queues, with the non siege queues, which was the TDM Onslaught mixed queue. At some point down the road, as you know today, those were separated. that was kind of just like a the modes were different enough that it felt strange to have them together, I guess. Um, so we separated them. They were still core game modes. Players really liked them. We were still getting questions about where Payload was, because Payload, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of this antithesis to Onslaught. Uh, Antithesis. It's yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it. If there's a better way to put it, I'm going to beat myself up over it later while I'm watching the recording of this. Um, anyways, so over the years, we were asked, for several years, it wasn't on our plate to investigate this. It didn't make sense for us to. We knew that the game mode was poorly, not was not super highly played, and realistically, it didn't feel like it made a ton of sense for a couple of years to try to invest time into bringing it back. Now, I will say that this time is not the only time we had investigated bringing it back. Um, it had been a point of discussion, and because it was so commonly brought up by the community, it has been a point of discussion internally for, I don't know, like forever. Um, because it's always on our minds, right? Like if it's on your mind, we hear about it and it's on our mind, even in the back of our minds. Like it's there somewhere, um, and it's like, what if? Does it make sense? No. Does it make sense? Maybe. Does it make sense? No. And like those maybes can kind of come to like, okay, well, we have this time set up for this patch. We have these goals set up for this patch. We have a little bit of time here. Make sure my hand's on screen. We have a little bit of time here. Do we feel okay? This is something that like has happened for bringing back other things, I guess. Do we have time to like take this little bit of time that we have, that isn't specifically devoted to something, and see about pulling Payload back? Um, and that has been a conversation that we've had in the past before this patch. Um, Sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes it was worth devoting a little bit of time, but not all of that extra time. Sometimes we didn't have any extra time. And that's kind of how that conversation has gone over the last couple of years. I don't know exactly what the time frame was where we were like considering it. Was, I mean, it was probably around the time frame that we like had those discussion tweets come out, right? Like, what was it? Was that 2020? Somebody's going to let me know in the comments. 2020, 2021, one of those two. It was around the time that like we had some tweets around Payload, like asking about it. But like there were times where it was a question of like, huh, do we have the time for this? Are we interested in this? And like that was one of those times where the answer was like maybe. Um, so that's like the history, and kind of like the why not before. So now we're going to transition into the why now. The why now is because Shaq is a badass. I get one chat. Um, Shaq's a badass, and really dug into a lot of like the depths of Paladins, and worked with our programming team and some other teams to like found some files, worked on resuscitating them. I don't know all the technical lingo behind exactly everything that happened, but I can definitely show a couple of his tweets from earlier today. Um, so a tiny bit of folks got to play today, which we were talking about earlier. I want to make sure that it's clear this is not as simple as switching the game mode on, which is something that I talked about on Twitter this past weekend, during the tweet thread that I said I was going to link down below. Took extensive playtesting and worked with programming to get some optimization and functionality sorted out. We also had a couple of map pieces missing, just like fully missing. Uh, Outpost had a couple of pieces just straight gone from um, from the map somewhere. Um, just like a couple of stairs or like a floor space just not arted at all. And by not arted, I mean it was literally invisible. Uh, and so, yes, why this wasn't done earlier, bear in mind we were a pretty small team and different things are prioritized at different times. We were just talking about that. So I beat Shaq to it, even though he tweeted it several hours ago. Got you. Um, uh, so that's kind of the why now is like it's one of those times where we were like, is this worth the time to put into it? And the answer was maybe a little bit. And so kind of how that works in the development process. This is something I can go into in a little bit in the game development process. Is like there's an amount of work there's like stages where you have to determine whether something's worth it. There's like an exploratory phase, there's like an initial development phase, there's like secondary development phase, and then there's kind of like the polish and shipping section. There's probably more individually small sections within those, but like generally the exploratory phase is like how like especially for things that are not guaranteed. Um, you put a little bit of time into it. Is it feasible? If it's something we like are really expecting to have, like if it's for a character design, or like a new champion design, we like that time span is a little bit longer. If it's something that we're really unsure about, that time span could be a little bit shorter. It's variable, right? But the idea of that exploratory phase is taking a little bit of time to determine whether or not something can be feasible. Um, Payload gone through that a couple of times. A couple of times we, in that time frame, we could not find it feasible to continue. This time we did. After we got there, though, it was like, okay, we've found the maps and got them to cook. What does that mean? Like, can we playtest them? If I remember correctly, the first playtest barely worked. Um, the first playtest like barely worked. I mean, it worked, and we were like, okay, this is promising. Like way more promising than we thought it was going to be at all. Um, but there were a lot of issues. One of the big ones that we ran into when we were playing it was the first map we loaded into was Frostbite Cavern. And 4 out of the 5 members of the defending team crashed on load in. So that was great. um, and it's stuff like that where you're like, okay, rough around the edges, workable. And you have to make that decision between workable and not workable. There's just stages where it's like, okay, do we continue to sink more time into it? Do we continue? Do we not? Um, and so, what Chak was saying was we've playtested that mode a lot. Like that mode has gone through iterations and iterations. They're very close to the same iteration of their predecessor, and by their predecessor I mean they're the same maps. Chat, they're the same maps. Um, uh, I was trying to be fancy with my language. The maps are almost unchanged, I believe. Um, there may be some ceilings in there that should have been lower. I can't guarantee that. I don't actually know for sure. Drogos might be busted on like Hidden Temple. Shout outs to all you Drogos mains out there. Um, but yeah, like that's kind of what happened was we hit the exploratory phase this time and we were like, okay, we'll try. And then we hit the we like play tested it and we're like rough, workable, we'll keep going. And we kept working on it, we kept play testing it, and it kept feeling better. And at some point we were like, how much better is this going to get before we can just say we're going to ship it? And the answer was none more better. And we shipped it. So that's kind of why um, that's kind of the history of this and um, what uh, what went into bringing that back, because it wasn't, as Shaq said and as I mentioned on Twitter, it's not as easy as just flipping the switch on. The maps could have been, I think, somebody was talking about a Twitter user was talking about data miners pulling, like, finding map files. It's different having them in a game versus in Unreal Editor. There's just a number of differences between, like, finding the map file and making it play the video game. So we bridged that gap, and Payload's coming to you in the season 6 patch. We had a couple of questions asked about some things. Um, One of them was um, just like game modes in general. One of them was about the survival game mode. I don't remember when the survival game mode was removed. I think it was earlier than Payload, but I don't quote me on that because I could get fired. Not really. Uh, but survival was a mode. For those of you who don't know, survival was a mode you played on a relatively smaller map. And you basically it was like uh babby battle royale, where you were 5v5 and you were on primal court, and you didn't respawn, and it was round based, and fog crept in. And whoever was surviving, whatever team survived at the end of the round got a point. It was so it's not like a terrible game mode. It is more traditional shooter game mode. Like, you'll see that a lot more, that kind of style of game mode a lot more in, like, CODs or Halos or that kind of thing. As opposed to like a fantasy shooter, it just didn't feel um the same in a hero shooter compared to a more traditional, like, military shooter or that kind of thing. Um, so it interesting concept, didn't really fit the game, was removed a little bit earlier. Very fun. Like, I had some fun with it. There's some clutch clips somewhere that are probably long gone of when I was playing original survival. It came with some ridiculous LTMs. There was the 5 invisible Drogos LTM that used the survival game mode. That If you were around for it, if you played that one, you're lucky your hair is still in. Um, Stuff like that. Uh, so, like interesting game, like, other things get removed for similar reasons. Like, game modes can get removed because the player base is too low and the matchmaking ends up not being good, and it actually ends up being better to incorporate the players who are playing that mode into the other modes. Or it just doesn't fit what design and the development team feels is the core concept, the core gameplay style of the game. And that's kind of more what LTMs are anyways, right? Like, we get to break the mold a little bit, um, but not it's not something that, like, really becomes a core game mode very easily, at least. Um, Survival, if it ever came back, could be an interesting LTM at some point, but it kind of falls into the same thing as Payload, where um, it would require a lot of extra work, or potentially, sorry, I should say potentially, because game development's weird. It could potentially require a lot of extra work to get it going. And there's a couple other aspects to it. One, it's significantly less requested than Payload has been over the last 5 years. Um, and it just, I don't know, it doesn't hit the same core gameplay style that Paladins, that like feels the same in Paladins. Maybe that's more my thought process than the development teams as a whole. But Payload is one of the two aspects of Siege, right? So, like, it kind of makes sense. Like, not even kind of, it makes sense. But survival a little less so. Um, One of the other questions that we had was why Onslaught queue is still Onslaught and King of the Hill. Could Payload be added to that queue? Um, and so it was kind of the same reason. The first question, Onslaught King of the Hill, kind of the same reason why TDM and Onslaught were paired together in the first place. Having game modes paired together reduces the number of queues that you can queue for, which generally increases the concentration of players in the other queues, or in all of the queues in general, I guess I should say. And so having fewer queues just is general better for matchmaking. That is a fact. Like that's just how math works. Because there are fewer people queuing for different things. Sorry, the same number of people are queuing for fewer things. So you're more likely to pair people better because as a result. The question of what if Payload joined that, interesting concept. Maybe it could at some point. Who knows? My thought as to why not immediately, there's a couple of reasons. One, King of the Hill is kind of a subsidiary of Onslaught in that they are both object standing objective based modes. King of the Hill has the added steps of the point rotating, but it is still a stationary objective defense mode. The stationary objective just also is mobile, which is weird to say, but it makes sense if you think about it. Whereas Payload but they're both the aspect of the stationary defense mode, right? Like that half of Siege, whereas Payload is the other half of Siege, the cart push. So the idea of those modes being together as like subsets of Siege kind of makes sense. Maybe down the road, I think if we had done that in this patch, the first patch Payload came back, we would have gotten wrecked. We People have been like, why do I have a 1 in 3 chance of queuing into Payload in the onslaught King of the Hill queue? And we would have gotten destroyed. Um and that's just a fact. Eventually maybe. Um I don't know. Never say never for things, like it could make sense, but I think the idea of bringing it back as its own mode, um as its own queue, not all the time, but like a significant portion of the time for the patch, is a reasonable thing to kind of test the waters with it, kind of see how players like it, um, see where the metrics are with it, because we don't know like the thing that we're not sure about, and the player we can't say that the players or aren't sure about it, but like there is a difference between like being really excited for the game mode and like playing a ton of it and going in, playing it for the nostalgia, and then being like, that's cool. And there are going to be players in both categories, right? The question that we have is, over the last 5 years, we've heard a lot of uproar for this game mode returning. That's just true. Like it has been very loud on social media. Um, will that transfer into the game? Is the question that we are trying to figure out with this as well. Is that interest that we hear about constantly going to be reflected in people playing the game mode in game? Because we're not sure. I don't think the players are sure either as a whole. Also, it's something that especially newer players just don't have any idea. Like it, Payload is such a unique position where it's a 7-year-old game mode that was taken away after 2 years and brought back after 5 more. So the people who have the most fond memories of it are the oldest guard of the old guard, like some of the oldest players in the entire game. And how many of those do we have? How many people would come back to play Payload? How many people who are newer players are intrigued enough to try it and stick around? These are all questions that we kind of have to ask ourselves with this going out, which is like, just questions that you ask yourselves in development. Is like, is this worth it? Um, or like, how is this going to be received? And that's like not just Payload, but for everything, right? Um, like that's just the question you ask everything. There's a lot of second guessing in game development if you weren't already sure of that. Lots of conversations, a lot of like, well, what about this? What about that? Okay, reasonable question, I think, may not have been asked from a reasonable standpoint. But I think it's reasonable to answer it because we've already talked about other game modes. Will we see Paladins Battlegrounds? Probably not. Um, there is so much more. Paladins Battlegrounds broke so many more molds in Paladins than anything else. Unlucky. Thank you for the follow. Paladins Battlegrounds broke so many more molds in Paladins than anything else in the entire game. And that's not an exaggeration. It's not close. Paladins Battlegrounds is the one of the most unique things, maybe the most unique thing that Paladins has ever seen. And the amount of work to try to bring that back would be astronomical. It is almost certainly not worth the amount of time and effort for us to bring it back. While it would be cool, and I can't say never, it would be just an insane amount of work, to be perfectly honest with you. Um, will we ever see maps for Payload? Kind of maybe depends on its reception. Um, Never say never. Who knows? The same in the same vein, will there be a ranked mode for Payload? Probably not. It seems that our ranked scene is mostly very comfortable with Siege. Siege has always been the core game mode in Paladins, at least like in the present day of Paladins. Like Siege has just been the core game mode. That's what we were talking about earlier. I would say probably not. There would need to be a significant shift in what ranked players wanted, I think, for that to maybe see the light of day. So I would doubt it. Custom payload? Who knows? Like payload and customs, I guess is the better question. Who knows? Maybe. Again, kind of maybe depends on the reception a little bit. If it's worth continuing to feel that. Um, let's see. I think that's mostly it. Did I have any other topics to cover? Um, we kind of talked about everything. So, that's my spiel about Payload. Again, it is uh, the mode that was removed from Paladins back in late 2017. Payload is coming back to Paladins soon. I don't remember the patch date, but soon. Sometime in the next several weeks, coming back in the season 6 update for Paladins. The patch notes, if you're watching this after Wednesday the 25th, the patch notes will have already happened, so you can go back and watch them. If you're watching this before Wednesday the 25th, you can go make sure to watch that. The patch show, it'll talk about payload and more. Uh, and this was just mainly to give like dev commentary on Payload, its history, and why it's coming back now, and like what dev's thoughts are on it. Because we are excited. Honestly, it's been really cool to have that game mode be a part of playtests. it's just different, right? Like, you know, our playtest can be anything from Siege to, I mean, like, hell, a ton of playtests in 2022 were iterations of Dawnforge. Um, just so many of them. LTMs, you know, we play all the game modes to bringing this game mode back that, frankly, most of the team had never seen before, but a couple of us knew exactly what was up. Was really cool. I remember these maps like the back of my hand still. Um, it was really fun. It's been really fun, and we're really excited to share Payload returning to y'all very soon. So, thank you all for watching. I've been Srixis. I am a lead QA at Hi-Rez Studios, and I'll see you all again soon. Peace.